Good morning, everyone, and thanks for being with us today on the fourth day of our LuxFLAG Sustainable Investment Week 2021. We at LuxFLAG would like to take a moment to thank you all for your support during this last very difficult month since the very tragic passing of LuxFLAG's General Manager, Sachin Bankalas. Sachin was a great human being and certainly a tireless supporter of sustainable finance. He exemplified LuxFLAG with his passion, ambition, and drive to move to a sustainable future. Thank you. In my role as acting general manager of LuxFLAG, I'm very pleased to see that after 2 editions, the LuxFLAG Sustainable Investment Week has already gained recognition. And that is thanks, first and foremost, to the LuxFLAG's associate members who are showcasing this week where they are in the sustainable finance journey. Given the finance industry is on different stages of that journey, obviously, this week is about sharing best practices so we all advance towards the goal of making all finance sustainable at one point in time. For the 3rd edition of the LSIW, we thank you for such a positive response with over 3,500 registrations. This is amazing, and I also like to thank to our host partners as well as to our media partners. The 25 sessions over the week cover the latest trends and most pressing issues in sustainable finance. We hope you find them useful, but you also find inspiration in the progress being made to harness finance to help find solutions to our current environmental as well as certainly the social challenges at hand. With that, a few words on the housekeeping. Slides and the recording of these sessions will be made available to you sometime after the LSIW. So for Q&A, please use the Q&A function at the bottom right of your screen. In case we don't get to have time for all the questions at the end of the session, the questions will be forwarded to the host of this session for subsequent responses to you directly. But now, let's turn to the session. And I'm really pleased to welcome you again to the 2nd session of today, hosted by Degroof Petercam Asset Management. DPAM is a leading independent institutional asset manager with Belgian roots and committed to offering active investment solutions relying on a unique blend of international expertise. For more than 20 years since their pioneering as a responsible and sustainable investor in 2021, DPAM offers sustainable and research-based investment strategies that across asset classes integrate ESG with sustainability at the core of their DNA. I'm very sure that it will be extremely interesting to hear from DPAM about a striking and broadly discussed topic these days. It's actually impact investing. So the topic being destination impact, is SFDR the answer? For that, I'm also pleased to introduce the excellent speakers we have with us today from DPAM. On one side, we have Ophélie Mortier. Ophélie is the responsible investment strategist at DPAM, and we also have the pleasure of welcoming Olivier Terras. Olivier is the country head Luxembourg at DPAM. With that being said, thanks for being with us this morning, and Ophélie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be virtually with you today to speak about different topics that I'm sure you are all concerned, maybe worried, but certainly interested in, I hope. So first of all, to answer to this question, which I hope you find it relevant, I would like to make a short summary of the whole long journey we have done from a long time ago regarding sustainable investments. And when I say we have done, I do not speak specifically about DPAM, but I speak about as DPAM, the pioneers in sustainable investments, which have started and were convinced about ESG for a long time ago. But even if it's already 20 years that we are involved and very convinced about the added value of sustainable investments, as you can see, it's a long time ago. You can find the roots of sustainable investments. And I think we have done a long journey from rather exclusions in the past to impact, as we are talking about, and this very big challenge for us to assess it and to measure it. And the question is, as we ask, whether SFDR and the regulation will help us to see better the impact we are generating with our investments. So we all, I think, we all do some exclusions, and the origin of the sustainable investment was mainly explained, I think, for reputation risk. We wanted, and we still want, to protect our investments from the reputation risk, notably regarding key elements like fundamental rights, the labor rights, the human rights, protection of environment, the fight against corruption. I think this is really a framework that everybody has adopted. But we moved as well to this famous concept of materiality in terms of ESG factors, and something which is also asked by the regulation as today, because we have to report, we have to disclose about the sustainability risk, showing that we are integrating these factors in all our investment decisions. And this is normal, we have to do this, because if you look at, for example, the valuation linked to the intangible assets of the companies, this has substantially increased over time. So now everybody, or almost everybody, is convinced that ESG is part of the picture when you want to invest in a company. But we have also this famous concept of impact. So now it's not sufficient to say that you are a sustainable investor because you apply a couple of exclusions and you invest in the best-in-class companies within all sectors. Sometimes it could say, I do not invest in the worst one. I take the good ones, but maybe in quite negative, impactful activities. So we really shifted from this showing that you do not finance specific activities, but also showing that you generate a positive impact, which is something not necessarily the same as avoiding negative impact. So we are looking for those activities which are clearly contributing to ESG challenges, to bring solutions to these challenges. A lot has happened since the last decade. So we have this big shift from exclusions to generation of positive impact in a very intense environment and situation. So from one hand, we have all this scientific proof and evidence that we have to do something, and we have to do something urgently, like the recent the recent 6th IPCC report. You see also the European Commission doing a lot in terms of sustainability, with notably this increase of ambitions regarding reduction of emissions. The COP26 will take place soon in Glasgow, and this will be clearly one of the key topics the countries will speak about it, this increase in terms of ambition. We see also all these things about Article 8, Article 9 product, and we will have the opportunity to speak that later on. A lot has changed, a lot has improved, notably in terms of standardization, in terms of standards, in terms of methodologies, which are better defined, maybe clearer for a lot of investors, but nevertheless the challenges remain. In terms of data availability, I think that we all agree that we still have a big issue in terms of data, notably for the smaller companies, notably for specific regions, and notably in terms of usefulness of data. If I speak about biodiversity, a lot is said about biodiversity. That is a key challenge. Clearly, you have a lot of data regarding biodiversity, but the question is, what is really useful in terms of financial decisions and portfolio constructions? As I said, we have seen a lot of evolutions regarding the methodologies, but we see as well the still big gaps between, for example, data providers information, and this could be also more highlighted with all the regulations we are seeing now in terms of, for example, adverse impact, in terms of alignment with taxonomy and so on. We are already seeing that we have important gaps between the different providers, showing that there are still a lot of questions about the exactitude of methodologies and the limits of those approaches. So we still have key challenges in terms of reporting and in terms of research. And I would like to also add one point regarding impact, is that, as I said, we have now moved to this concept of showing the ESG impact. So in the past, we had rather to demonstrate that sustainable investment brought an added value to your portfolio in terms of performance, that this was not a cost of return. Certainly not, and even trying to prove that it was an addition, an added value in terms of portfolio construction, because it could improve the ratio risk return of your investment. But now we have clearly this third dimension, which was notably introduced by the PRI and their blueprint campaign already in 2017, to demonstrate this third dimension of what's the impact of our investments beyond the financial performance in terms of extra financial performance, in terms of impact on the world. And we see clearly the link also with the impact investing, which is clearly defined in terms of impact and which is clearly defined in terms of measuring this impact. For the, I would say, the public universe, like the listed equities, the corporate bonds, and even the sovereign bonds, it's much more challenging, I think, and we all agree on that, to demonstrate this impact. So we have seen also that the SDGs have been used really as a sort of agreed by the all communities, agreed framework to report on this kind of impact in terms of impact on the society. And we can also make the link between these SDGs and what is generally used and traditionally used by the impact investing world. So you see impact investing, they are regularly referring to climate change, natural capital, basic needs, and empowerment as key themes of impact for the society. And if you use this internationally agreed framework of SDGs, you can easily map those SDGs to the different, these four key impact themes. But you will already say, you are speaking about mapping SDGs, and this is not really a clear, tangible, measurable impact indicator, because finally it's rather a sort of mapping exercise and assessing the impact. So we could legitimately ask whether notably the SFDR will clear the situation and will help the situation. But before speaking about the regulation and whether it's answering this key challenge of impact, I would like to remind that we have other channels as well to make impact. We do not have necessarily to focus on this impact measurement to the society. You have also to look at all the trends regarding sustainable investments. The fact that, as I said, when we started already 20 years ago, investing with sustainable approaches. We were rather looked as a sort of Greenpeace of the finance world. If you see where we are today, we really moved from a sort of niche asset class to a mainstream fund, to a mainstream trend, which is also something very impactful for the society in terms of assets under management, in terms of lobbying, and in terms of impact we might have. And this is also something you can see in the different collaborative initiatives committed asset managers are joining. Another way to impact is also our shareholder responsibility. And when we speak about this, we should not make a distinction between the so-called labelized sustainable investments and the rest of our investments. We should express our word in any company we are shareholder, because this is our responsibility and this is our duty. And you might say, okay, we are a minority shareholder, it will not make a difference. Look at what has happened over the last years, notably regarding the big oil majors. This shareholder responsibility has changed things, and we have to continue to make our impact through this kind of channel as well. Engaging, which is also I would not say new thing in terms of sustainable investments, but clearly from this exclusion characteristics, which was really in the heart of the process, at the root, at the inception of sustainable investment. Engagement has taken an important place in terms of approach, in terms of philosophy. So we see everywhere engagement as a key tool to make an impact and to change things. And you can engage, not necessarily the engagement like the Anglo-Saxon world sees it or means it, but engage dialogue with the companies to notably to share best practices in terms of impact, in terms of reducing this harmful effect they might have with a couple of activities or behavior. And this is also very important in terms of responsibility, because we have also to finance the transition to a better world and the transition to a lower carbon economy. And this has to be done with the transition activities as well. And engagement is clearly key here in terms of impact as well. So let's speak about SFDR now. Is the answer we are all looking for several years now, to get more clarity of sustainable investments and their real impact on society. So I will make a short recap on the regulation. I assume a lot among you are already very familiar with the regulation, because we definitively speak a lot about it over the last 15 months. So first of all, remind that the D is for disclosure. So first of all, it is a disclosure regulation, but you have to understand clearly in which framework it is engaged to understand the challenges and the objectives of this disclosure regulation. So it's part of the EU Action Plan for Sustainable Finance, as you all know, and the three main objectives of this action plan will help you to clearly understand what this disclosure regulations aims at finally. So the first objective is reorientation of capital. That's why the European Commission has set the EU taxonomy. That's why they are working on European Union label. That's why they have defined the standards for green bonds with a European Union framework, because they really want that the investments go to what they call the real economy and to be aligned with their ambitions plan, such as the Green Deal, so financing a sustainable and inclusive growth. Second objective is sustainability risk management. So as I said, ESG factors should be integrated in all investment decisions because it's part of the decisions, and the European Commission wants to ensure that this is done systematically. So you have to report, and this is your duty, to include the sustainability risk in any of your decisions, investment decisions. And that's also the reason why the scope of SFDR is so large, and that everybody is concerned by SFDR, not only the asset managers, but the insurance companies, the banks, the retail banks, and all financial market participants. And the last objective is fostering transparency and long-termism. The European Union Commission wants to fight against short-termism, which has been reported for a long time to the investment world. And this is also the reason why they are setting a lot of new regulation for corporates as well, in terms of non-financial reporting directive, and the future one, the Corporate Sustainability Regulatory Directive, the CSRD, which will be also important regulation to come. So as I said, it's first of all and foremost a disclosure regulation. So you have to understand it as say what you do and prove what you say. But the disclosure regulation is not there to say that excluding tobacco is a condition to be sustainable or not sustainable. They do not list any exclusion criteria, any minimum threshold in terms of ratings or in terms of emissions, carbon emission reduction, and so on. It's clearly say what you do, and this has to be tangible, measurable, and we can check every year that you are doing what you will do. So first of all, in terms of pre-agreement information, you have to say finally if you consider that you are green or not green. This is related to the classification. And prove what you say is everything related to your regulatory reporting. So for your funds, it's related to the annual report, but also the annual report from the management for the mandates you are managing. If we look at this famous classification, which has created a lot of confusion today, we can try to summarize it with this chart and this graphic. So you have, as you know, 3 official categories of products from the, I would say, no green products, which are called the others. Some people call it Article 6, but this is not fully correct, but let's say the others product. So if you do, for example, you have to do sustainability risk integration, because as I said, it is part of your duty. Afterwards, you have what we call the Article 8 products, so referred as the light green product. And we have the famous Article 9 products, which are clearly defined by the European Commission, and they are increasingly insisting on the fact that this is the most dark green products you may have in terms of sustainable, in terms of impact products. Article 9 100% of your portfolio invested in so-called sustainable investments, to be understood as saving the world. The situation today is that we have not so a lot portfolios categorized as Article 9 because the constraints are very strict. And an interesting survey from Morningstar shows that finally up to now you have less than 5% of the market categorized as Article 9 and with a bias to equity products and thematic products. The fact is that with the others products, we have some fear about the future of these kind of products, notably in terms of MiFID directive and the assessing of the ESG preferences from the clients. There is likely interpretations to say that this kind of products might not be eligible for this kind of investors. So there is a sort of rush to the Article 8 products, which we have to say today that due to the lack of clarity in terms of requirements, we do not have a clear view of what are the minimum rules to be an Article 8, and you have a lot of different approaches in this classification, with a sort of very light green product to sort of greener product, but not yet the famous sustainable investment impact strategies. So still a lot of unclarity and confusion about this classification, which might be already a first answer to the question SFDR will answer the question of impact. Probably not, but to be continued. Two key concepts as a reminder regarding SFDR is the famous principal adverse sustainability indicators. So these are clearly defined environmental and social indicators on which we have to report at entity level if you have committed to disclose it. Otherwise, you should put a specific disclaimer to say that you will not disclose your PASI indicators, and at the product level for the famous Article 9, but also for the part of Article 8 products, which pretend to aims at a partially sustainable objective as well. And a second key concept of SFDR is the famous do not significantly harm principle, the DNSH principles, to prove that you are trying to reduce the negative impact of your investments, and this has to be applied again to your sustainable investments, so the so-called Article 9 and the Article 8, which aims partially to a sustainable objective as well. So after the first deadline was, as you know, 10 March 2021. So after a couple of months, we can wonder and raise the question whether SFDR has already achieved partially or fully the objectives. So as you know, the three objectives are reorient flows to the real economy, the systematic integration of ESG risk, the sustainability risk, and the promotion of transparency and long-termist fight against short-termists. If we look at the result as of today, and I kindly remind that we are still waiting for the final RTS. We received something in February, we received something in March, but the final one are not yet available. So I still speak under a big warning and disclaimer that everything will depend on the final RTS, even if we could expect no major changes to the currently available RTS. The first observations we have in terms of product classifications, as I already said, I don't think we have a clear view of what is sustainable, what is not sustainable. Because as I said, a very small minority of products have classified themselves as an Article 9, and to be checked whether they will keep this Article 9 classification, with all the reminders from the European Commission that these are the darkest green product, 100% invested in sustainable investments. And so the result is this Article 8 with this also Article 8 hybrid category, because they aims partially to a sustainable objective, with different approaches in all this category. Some funds do not have any exclusions. Some funds have a very in-depth ESG integration with exclusions, with best-in-class approach, and all these different various approaches we have seen over the last years in terms of sustainability. Second observation is clearly an administrative burden. We have to say that we do and redo the different papers and papering for our mandates, for our prospectus, but we have to admit also that this has integrated more formalism regarding rules and approaches, so to a certain extent to fight against greenwashing, which is the big challenge of sustainable investments. Third observation is in terms of ESG. SFDR is clearly a data game changer in terms of ESG data, as we do not rely anymore on opinions, assessments, but more and more on raw data. So it should improve comparison and standardization, which is also a challenge for the activity. Sustainability risk and the integration of ESG risk, I think this is achieved because it's clearly a duty in SFDR. And the question of impact is, I think, something to question furthermore, and this is also what we say now in the last 20 minutes of this presentation. So is SFDR answering your questions, whether, because we see a lot of questions from investors, as you can read on my slide. But finally, I'm not sure that SFDR is answering questions like, how is sustainable, how is my portfolio sustainable? Is there any clear exclusion of fossil fuels? What's the impact of my portfolio in terms of society? So all these questions might remain a bit unanswered by SFDR, I fear. And so DPAM has the responsibility, with our positioning of active, sustainable and research, to give an answer to this question. So we have, and we will comply with our regulatory requirements and SFDR disclosure, but we want to bring an answer to these questions you are still raising in terms of sustainable investments. So in all this, I remind that we have 20 years of experience, notably with the ESG data. And in all this environment, which is particularly busy for the moment in terms of sustainability, be it from the investors' questions, from the stakeholders' questions, from the regulation, from the scientific reportings. Finally, what's our positioning, what's our answer? We want to remain coherent and consistent with our convictions for the last 20 years. So active, sustainable research, because we know the weaknesses of the ESG data providers, for example. We know that it's very difficult to have a black and white situation. There are a lot of things to clarify. There are a lot of very positive impact from companies, while still some negative impacts to reduce. That's the reason why we remain stick to our philosophy to be active in terms of assessment, ESG ratings and so on. Do not dictate our portfolios. Everything is based on an in-depth research-driven qualitative assessment before investing in our companies and countries. and also long term, because as a sustainable investor, we want to accompany the corporate and the company the whole journey of their business. So we do not invest on short term. It means also that engagement is particularly important, because we will invest, but we will also play a role of I would say intermediate, to share best practices we can see here and there with the companies we are invested in. As I said, it is important to say what you do and do what you say, and to make a clear message of your sustainable commitment, of your sustainable portfolios and strategies. What are your sustainability objectives when you develop sustainable portfolios? We have a threefold commitment through all our sustainable strategies, which are firstly defend the basic and fundamental rights. We think it's a first key element: human rights, labor rights, fight against corruption, protection of environment. We need also to protect our investments from reputational risk, as it was in the past, in the roots of sustainable investments. So we will do not invest in controversial activities and be in companies which have very controversial behaviors. This is very clear in our controversial activity policy, which is because transparency is key principle as well, which is available and disclosed in our website. And the third commitment is probably the most important and very related with what we said today, this famous seek of impact. So first of all, of course, we want to promote best practices, best efforts as well, because as I said, we want to accompany the corporate. Maybe it's not yet the best one in the world, but it is really committed to become the best one in the world. But we want also to invest in the real economy, this famous first objective of the European Union ambition plan. So it means that we are looking for companies which, through their products and services, and not necessarily through their behaviors, of course the behaviors have to be checked, but the product and services bring tangible solutions to the current ESG challenges. So this famous ESG impact. To do this, we have a very systematic and rigorous process, because as I said, we have a long experience and we have a learning curve, which is particularly important in terms of sustainable investments, to really understand all the positive and negative impacts of every decisions. So the first commitment will be translated through what we call a normative screening based on the Global Compact principles. The second commitment, as I said, is based on a very detailed controversial activity policies, and also a strict in-depth research of the and check of the and monitoring of the activities of the companies. We have tomorrow a monthly committee to review the most severe controversies of, for example, the IT and telecom sector. Every month we look in depth to specific sectors, always with the analyst and the PM. So integration by the portfolio managers and the investment professional is very key to be successful in terms of sustainable performance and in terms of ESG impact. And the third commitment will be done through best-in-class approach when it is relevant with the universes. So for example, in large cap equities, the weaknesses of ESG data is not an issue, and we can do some screenings, but also very in-depth proprietary scorecards, which are more adapted for example, thematic strategies or smaller capitalizations and so on. And all this qualitative fundamental research, which is also complemented by engaged dialogue or formal engagement or engagement through collaborative initiatives. You can see a couple of key names in the transparency. And this search of impact is done also through, of course, looking at the sustainability teams. We are convinced these are the teams for the long-term trends we want to be exposed. But when we identify different teams, we will also focus on where do we want to position ourselves in terms of value chains of this team, whether we want to be really upstream or downstream or middle stream of the team to be really aligned with our sustainable, looking for sustainable performance and looking for sustainable ESG impact. So I already mentioned the SDGs can be a framework, and I will come back how we have used this internationally agreed framework to make a first assessment of this ESG impact. So I've shown also in the beginning of the presentation the 4 key topics used by the impact investing, which are probably the better positioned in terms of impact measurement because they have a long track record in terms of indicators and measures. So up to now, we used to assess for all the positions we have in our sustainable portfolios, whether they tick 1 or maximum 2 teams you can see in this chart. Before arriving to this result, I will show you a concrete example of a company we are invested in, is Royal DSM, which is very innovative in terms of nutrition, with the development of a lot of enzymes and natural ingredients to improve health, nutrition, and well-being, while keeping also in mind the environmental impact they may have. So if we take the example of DSM, we see that we clearly convinced about their impact, positive impact in terms of land and biodiversity, and in terms of health, nutrition, and well-being. So we will do this exercise for all positions in our portfolio. And if a position has no team, we will not try to absolutely map with one team or not. So we make it really transparent and really fair exercise. And when we have assigned an objective or not to all the positions in the portfolio, we arrive to this result. So we can see clearly where the fund is invested and what is the impact in terms of society. The exercise is not at all precise. It is an assessment, but I think it's already a good evidence that when you invest in a sustainable equity portfolio, like for European equity strategy, you will finance empowerment, you will finance basic needs, you will finance natural capital and climate change. But we wanted to go further because it lacks objectivity. It could lack details and in-depth research. So we have studied different solutions to improve this measurement and assessment. And this is done notably with Util, which is the provider we have recently selected, because we appreciated several features from Util compared to others. First of all, it is based on artificial intelligence, meaning that it's using a lot of sources, which help us to have, I would say, as large as possible sources of information. Secondly, Util will not take into account the controversies companies might face. Regularly, peers are using once again all these controversies assessment we have already taken into account in our portfolio construction. So we do not want to focus on behavior, we want to focus on the products and services. Another feature we like, it is looking at all the 17 SDGs. So we think that we have really a global assessment of the impact of any company in our different portfolio. And last feature we like very much is that it will look at the positive and the negative impact to any of the SDGs. So we think this is really aligned with the principle and philosophy of do not significantly harm principle of the regulation. And that's the reason we have decided to work with this partner to assess better the impact of our portfolio. As I said, they will refer to the 17 SDGs, and for each economic activity, they will determine whether the activity, based on all the scientific relationships made by the artificial intelligence, they will determine a positive or negative contributions to any of the SDG. The contributions can be from -2 to +2. So it remains an assessment of impact. Saying that it's clearly impact measurement would not be perfectly correct, because you have still this assessment of the impact -2 +2. And then you will also be much more precise, because if you look at DSM, they will not look at DSM as one single company, but they will look at any individual activities of DSM and make the link with the positive or negative impact for each SDG. And then they will look at the proportion of the turnover of DSM, for example, linked to this specific activity. And everything will result in this last chart from my presentation. It's for any company and at aggregate level of the portfolio, you can have this impact measurement for all the SDGs. As you can see, you have the 17 SDGs around the circle. The green part is showing, of course, the positive contribution of the specific enterprise or the specific portfolio, depending at which level you are. And you see also the red, which is the negative contributions to the different SDGs. And so you have a much more objective impact measurement and much more detailed impact measurement, which is fully aligned with the key principles of what SFDR is trying to answer, and also fully aligned with what the investors would like to know about their sustainable investments. A last video to summarize our 20 years of sustained dedication, and I hope qualitative, in-depth sustainability approach clearly aligned with our positioning, active, sustainable research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ophélie. While we are uploading the video, yeah, there it is. Thank you. Perfect. And Ophélie, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation today. We, I guess, all learned a lot about your approach, but also the insights that you shared were really valuable. Since we're having a few minutes left, we have received some questions, and if okay still with you, I will just bring them forward to you. From the audience, actually, we got a question, quite interesting one, saying that political reorientation of capital is good for the long-term return. Short-term, it will, however, move capital and increase the demand for qualified investments, in this respect, sustainable investments, which should increase the prices of the latter and reduce potentially long-term return. So what kind of long-term return should we look for in an Article 8 product?
I think this is a very interesting and relevant question, and this is also something we have already noticed on the capital markets. You have already an impact on the valuation of certain usual suspects, I would say, in terms of green investments. The taxonomy could pose also this risk, because if the European Commission have clearly said that it does not say what is sustainable or not sustainable, the result is that you know which activities are more entitled to get a higher alignment in terms of taxonomy, and those which will have a lower alignment in terms of taxonomy. So it could also redirect the investments to those issuers which have a higher rate of alignment, because we have also this regulatory requirement to disclose the alignment of taxonomy. So it's clearly something happening on the markets. I cannot say what will be the performance of an Article 8 or an Article 9 on the long term, but what can I say is that this risk and this fear of a sort of sustainable investment bubbles is already existing in the mind of some investors. But I think this is also we have had to manage investment bubbles. That's the job of an asset manager. So I think, and because we are an active and really stock picker and conviction manager, I think it's important to still do very well your job in terms of in-depth fundamental research, to be able also to distinguish which are those enablers or those green companies that may not be yet identified by the capital markets and not yet impacted by this valuation, to still contribute to sustainable performance. And I think this is a successful key of our company. We do not work separately. It's not a specialist in ESG like my team working alone and totally independent of what is happening on the market. You really have to work all together to see it as an value added in terms of investment portfolio construction, rather than a sort of hurdle in terms of performance, and now maybe a hurdle in terms of regulation, because regulation is clearly a big move over the last 2 years to make the difference and to protect a bit against these trends, which is already visible today.
Thank you, Ophelie. And if you could just stay on for 1 second, and a very quick question, because you touched upon Article 9 a lot, and the word of impact is kind of used inflationary these days, and one can find it in almost in a lot of different kind of marketing campaigns. But true impact means that, as you said rightly, it is a tangible positive impact, and it's intentionally and it's measurable, right, on environmental or social factors, alongside the financial return, obviously. So what is it, in your opinion, with respect to the development of impact investments? Will we long-term see that basically Article 9 become the standard in our industry in order to provide tangible results?
Again, a very good questions. I don't expect an important increase of the Article 9 products, certainly not on the short term, because if I listen here and there to my colleagues and my peers, we are a bit frightened by the very requiring regulatory requirements in terms of Article 9 and all the unclarity existing about this product. So on the short term, I do not expect a big increase of this kind of product because for the moment we lack data. As I said, it's possible to assess as precisely as possible the impact, but saying that it's a clear impact measurement, this is not fully correct. I think we have to be transparent and fair, and we have also all the challenges of transition. So I think it's also a responsibility to finance these transitions, and so there will remain some activities which are not perfectly aligned with the taxonomy, and which could have important DNSH contradictions, for example. So on short term, I do not expect that. On the medium term, to see if it will be still necessary to speak about all this kind of products, Article 8, Article 9, but that's not for tomorrow, I think.
Thank you. And again, thank you very much for your very good presentation, also the explanations you've been providing. Also, big thanks again to you, Olivier, and DPAM for hosting this session today. A big thanks also goes to the LuxFLAG team for having made all this possible. And I would like to close with a quote from you, Ophélie, which I actually found quite striking and hope will resonate with the audience, because he said, "It is actually our responsibility and duty to make our voice heard with every investee company." So it's basically this what will create long-term impact. So thanks again for this. And our next session is actually starting at 11. It will be hosted by Société Générale Private Banking, focusing on on how to ride the energy transition investment wave. Thank you very much again to you, and all the best. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.